Hi everyone, I hope you are all doing well. I'm looking forward to introducing our next learning module this week. This week we will start looking into the characteristics of gifted and talented learners. I think it's really important that we do this so soon in the semester because as we learn about how to appropriately serve gifted students, it's important to remember that not all students who are gifted have been identified for services. And no matter what age you want to teach or who you want to work with, you always need to keep your eyes open to students who may really benefit from gifted and talented services. So, to recap, last week we looked at the definitions of giftedness. What does it actually mean to be gifted? One thing that you should definitely be clear on at this point is that there are a multitude of different ways that we define giftedness. That introduces a lot of problems, and you'll notice that not all states define giftedness in the same manner. So I talked about this last week, but just to reiterate, my favorite model is Renzulli's three-ring concept, and that is the intersection between above average ability academically, above average task commitment or motivation, and then your above average creativity. So that's my favorite definition, but of course, all researchers and teachers are biased. So I think for our case, what I want to do, just for a sense of clarity, is review South Carolina's definition of giftedness. If you go back and read the South Carolina definition, it's pretty broad, right? And this happens a lot, so be careful. If you're working in a teaching setting and you ask your principal, how do you define giftedness? You need to take that definition that she or he says kind of with a grain of salt because what happens is oftentimes, excuse me, we'll have appropriate definitions of the gifted, but then our identification procedures don't really match those definitions. And really, how we define giftedness and serve gifted students depends on identification. So, as a consultant, as a teacher, I'm usually more interested in how they identify for gifted students because that's where we make those decisions. That's where we decide whether or not Jimmy or Sally or Lashandra is going to have the opportunity to take advantage of these gifted services. So in South Carolina, remember you have three different dimensions to reach these gifted and talented services. So you have dimension A, B, and C. And in order to be served, you need to fulfill two out of those three. The only exception is with dimension A, which is your aptitude. If you're at a super high percentile, like a 98th or 99th, then you're automatically identified as gifted. So let's recap. We have dimension A, that is your aptitude. Remember, aptitude is your general reasoning. I like to attribute it to like an IQ test. South Carolina will use the COGAT. Others will say COGAT, depending on who you talk to. So your aptitude scores would be dimension A. Dimension B is your achievement scores. Now, this can be in either mathematics or English/language arts, depending upon who you talk to. And that is, again, a standardized test, right? The big difference between aptitude and achievement is aptitude is very general, whereas achievement, you can attribute it to one content. When I first explain this to some of my students, I say, would you give a math test? Yes. Therefore, a math test is a test of achievement. Now, would you give just a general, like IQ tests are very full of pictures and graphics and patterns and what comes next? Typically, I'm not like teaching that material in my classroom, so it's a good hint that it's more related to aptitude. So we have dimension A, your aptitude, dimension B, you have your achievement, and finally dimension C is your academic performance. Now that sounds kind of more promising than it is. Academic performance, usually in a elementary setting, is determined by something called Project STAR, which is, again, more of a standardized assessment. But as we get up into higher grades, we are able to use GPA in that manner. So unless you are meeting 2 out of those 3 dimensions, you are not identified for gifted services in South Carolina. Now, this week's learning module progresses beyond a simple definition, and now we are going to start looking at characteristics of gifted students. In other words, what will they be doing in your classroom? If you had to nominate 3 students who could potentially be gifted, what would you look for? Where would they be sitting in the classroom? What kinds of questions would they ask? Would they be on task or off task? And I love to do this assignment right after that myths and realities reflection because you really need to keep yourself in check. We often will think, oh, gifted, well behaved, super smart. You need to get out of that mindset, right? So make sure that when you're reading over your library materials, you're looking at both the positive and the negative manifestations of giftedness. I think I've already given this example, but one way that helps me to consider how it's both positive and negative, let's take the characteristic of curiosity. Now, curiosity is very common among the gifted. In a positive manner, we would expect to see curiosity, say, you're introducing a new science topic. Oh my gosh, the student is so excited. They're raising their hand, they're asking questions. They can't wait to talk to you about it more. They go home, they do their own research. Super curious, right? That's what you're used to looking for. However, imagine the child who's sitting kind of in the corner of the room. You're introducing that new science topic, and he's sneaking a book under his desk, and he's reading something new, and he's taking notes in it, and you're giving homework, and he's just kind of quickly going through it because he doesn't care about it. He's still working on that same book under his desk. He's curious too. He's just not curious about what you want him to be curious about. And that's the difference. We have to, as educators, think about the root that we're seeing, the root behavior, and how it manifests differently. So both of those have a root of being curious. One of them is manifesting in a positive way, one is manifesting in a negative way. So be careful as you're going through this material to really pay close attention to the characteristics both positively and negatively. Which brings us to our next case study. This is one of my favorite case studies, and it's about a child named Adam. Of course, we've changed his name. He's a young child in kindergarten, and he is working on an art project. So as you'll see in the case study, his work sample is a drawing of a turkey, and he's been causing some problems in the classroom because he won't finish his work. So he's been very slow completing this drawing, and he's been working really hard on it, but his teacher is frustrated because he won't follow directions. He won't finish the work and get it completed so they can move on to the next thing. And actually what happens is Adam is pretty smart mouthing his teacher, and teacher gets upset. Long story short, calls the parents in and has a parent-teacher conference. Now, something interesting about this case study is we actually have a transcript of the case of the parent-teacher conference, so you can read through what happened and how Adam's parents responded. This is a tough one because the teacher is upset, saying he's just being a really big trouble in the classroom. He won't finish his work. He's not paying attention. He's not doing well in school. And your task, after you have reviewed the characteristics of gifted students, is to take the role of his parents and consider how his, quote, negative behaviors might actually be indication that he is gifted, right? So look at his characteristics, look at all of the material in the case study, and ask yourself, how could this actually show that he's gifted and not that he's getting in trouble? Remember, guys, you really need to review this rubric in terms of your discussion board posts. I've given all of you feedback for your posts, and a lot of you gave me some information from the library materials but didn't cite that information, or some of you were really just giving me your opinion. As a graduate class, make sure that you are citing your sources. I need to know where you're getting these ideas, and your discussion board posts, and to earn full points, you need at least 2 references. Think of these discussion board posts as an opportunity for you to really synthesize all of the information that you've taken in through the library content. As usual, I'll be looking for your first response by Friday evening, or your initial post by Friday evening, and then your response to at least 2 classmates by Sunday evening. I would really encourage you guys to print some of this material out, particularly the checklists. I think those are helpful, just really good things to have in your pocket as a teacher as you begin advocating for gifted students and preparing yourself to serve them in the classroom. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks.